What's up, guys? Hope you're doing well so far. Let's cut straight to the chase. What did it all mean? And by it, I mean more exactly the new Gaster door that Toby and crew just walked right by during the 10th anniversary Undertale stream. The first one, I believe, was when this happened. And why'd they walk right by it? Why is it colored in and not gray? All of these questions and more answered in today's video. But first, be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you're a fan of the channel. It helps me out a lot. And also consider joining the Discord server. It's called the Fruit Basket. It's a great place full of fun people, fun events, interacting with me and fans of Deltarune and the channel alike. So be sure to join that. Link is in the description down below and in all places that I have links like the channel bio. Thank you. First off, what all do we know about the door? So, in our versions of Undertale, the door was always gray. The Gaster door that has, I think it's only one fun value. I think it's 66, I think. I'm not entirely caught up on that. That's when it appears, and it's always gray. And gray seems to be a pretty important color for Undertale and Deltarune. There are a lot of things that are gray, which I intend to go into in this video. And this is made especially important with the newer inclusion of Deltarune Chapter 3's Ed Room, in which one of the smaller, like 8-bit Rudens tells us that copies are monochrome, which is now a pretty popular theory-based statement. I see this in a lot of theories around the various platforms about the copies are monochrome. I actually used it in a video myself at least once, if not twice, this summer. And there are many entities that have both gray and colored versions. In fact, most things that are gray, if not everything that is gray, has a version that is colored. But now there's a brand new entity that has appeared that is gray and colored as well. Well, rather, we had the gray version, and now we have the colored version as well. But first, let's talk about some of the other things that we've already known about prior to this. The first one is the Gaster followers. So the Gaster followers are monochrome gray versions of existing NPCs. They are copies of existing NPCs that, as the name suggests, they follow Gaster and seem to kind of like maybe worship him in some ways. Maybe they at least are kind of like aware of him more than others are. They seem to have knowledge of him. One even claims to have a piece of him just in his hands, which is pretty interesting. They tell us that he was shattered across space and time. They tell us that he was Gaster, the royal scientist, and he fell into his creation, which may or may not have been the core or a dark fountain or this and that. So these guys are our main sources of Gaster lore. And the question that occurred to me recently was, what if Gaster made these creatures himself in order to serve him or follow him? Maybe it's kind of like a Voldemort situation where these guys are kind of like Horcruxes, and these guys kind of hold the pieces, at least some of the pieces of Gaster, because most of the gray things that we see in Undertale and Deltarune are, well, they're copies, for example, but also they seem to be constructed, like man-made, for example. And I'll get into more of these later, but vessels seem to be created, like man-made, or monster-made, maybe if you want to put it that way, creations that are based off of humans. And New Home is a self-made copy of Old Home, or the Ruins Home, by Asgore. So what if Gaster used monsters that he saw in the underground and made these gray versions of them himself in order to hold parts of him or to carry out his message as kind of like the apostles of Gaster? So that's the first example of a set of gray creatures that also has a colored form. These things are copies of existing NPCs that are, pretty rare, and I don't remember the exact fun values that they appear at. They're more likely to appear than Gaster himself, for example, but they're still pretty rare, and some of the most concrete, most direct Gaster examples in the game. In a similar sense, we have Clam Girl. Now, Clam Girl is, I guess, also a Gaster follower, but she's a special Gaster follower because she directly, or almost directly, references Deltarune. She was updated to have this interaction around Deltarune's release to tell us, or tell Frisk, that we are going to meet someone named Susie with a Z, so S-U-Z-Y, not S-U-S-I-E Susie. Maybe, obviously, this is a common theory that it's Undertale's version of Susie, it's just spelled a bit differently. But this definitely gives a concrete connection between monochrome gray creatures, Deltarune, and Gaster, and obviously this gray monotone thing is important for Deltarune as well because of the vessels and the copies or monochrome dialogue being from Deltarune, and also because Gaster seems to be more important to Deltarune as well. And now we have this character who seems to be mentioning Deltarune in some way. It seems to be knowledgeable that we are going to be meeting a Deltarune character at some point in Deltarune's universe, possibly, because we don't meet Susie in Undertale ever, so it seems to be more like a meta reference to Clamgirl knowing that we, as the player, perhaps, are going to be interacting with Susie soon. Which most Undertale players, well, maybe not most, but a lot of them do end up doing that. So that's the connection between Gaster, Deltarune, Gray, copies, obviously, once again, because Clamgirl is a copy, well, this gray one is a copy of the original Clamgirl, which, come to think of it, doesn't the Clamgirl turn into this? Like, it's not like they're two separate creatures. I think if you talk to her and your fun value is right, she becomes gray. So maybe she's, like, covered up and kind of hiding her grayness beneath. Now on to vessels, which I've mentioned a few times already, because it's the most obvious, most important one, I think, here. Is that the vessels are also monochrome. Well, they have a bit of, like, brown in them with, like, the hair and the pants and stuff, but this is the most concrete example of a copy being monochrome, because this is clearly a copy of a human like Chris, who we are supposed to control and play as through the game before getting intercepted by the second voice in the Donner Maker. And it looks a lot like Chris, obviously. Well, it looks like a human in the same way that Chris does. Same kind of proportions, same build, same shirt. Obviously, the hair can be a bit different. But vessels are copies. They are copies of humans. They are constructs made by Gaster, likely, maybe in the meat factory, you know, that are meant to imitate a human. So there's also a possibility that Chris is simply a vessel as well, because of the Chapter 4 Egg Room that features the hand-washing scene and the gray crease in your hand that won't come out. I mentioned that in a video a while ago, like last month, I think, about how that might suggest that at least part of Chris is a vessel, if not like their entire body, but like maybe their hand or their arm is a vessel that's been painted over with human colors in order to, you know, be colored with care, as the Rudens say in the Chapter 3 Egg Room. That's a possibility as well. So maybe Chris is also a vessel. Maybe they're a copy of something else. If you're a big Chris is Kara or Frisk believer, then maybe Chris is like a copy of one of those humans that has been painted over to look like them. Food for thought. Next up is a more interesting one. Okay, that's not supposed to be there. This is a placeholder from the last video that I forgot to mix up, but the new home in the stream, well, not in the stream, in both versions of Undertale, both the stream version and our version, but I realized this during the stream because of the gray, or the newly brownish orange colored Gaster door. New Home is also gray, and New Home was also a copy of the Ruins home that Toriel and Asdor lived in, because we know that they lived there together and then they broke up, and then Asdor rebuilt his old home basically identically to the one in the Ruins, so that he can, you know, live there, and probably some sort of coping mechanism, right? And it's just the exact same thing. It's a copy, but it is gray. It is monochrome. So this to me suggests that the monochrome thing, like the copies are monochrome thing, isn't just a Gaster thing. It's not just things that Gaster makes, unless Gaster built New Home. Maybe Asdor hired Gaster to build New Home. That's a small little mini theory for you there. But this seems to extend beyond Gaster, likely, and it's just something that's intrinsic to the world of Undertale and Deltarune, that copies are going to become gray. So that's something that is, like, you can't go too far with that. It's one of those kind of quirks of the universe, but I think that is something that Toby wants to be a part of his universes, is that things that are copies become gray. Then now we have the point of the video, which is the Gaster door, the impetus for all of this stuff. This is the newest revelation because this is the first one, or the only one, that really appeared in the Undertale 10th anniversary stream. As I said before, the door is usually gray, as I have here on the right. but the one in the video is colored the same color as Sans' door, and of course it's also the same texture as the like fast travel doors in the Dark World. So that suggests a connection between Gaster and Sans and the Dark World as well. But there's a number of theories as to why the one in the stream would have been orangish brown, like colored in door color, as opposed to gray. And this is one that I've seen a few times that I kind of agree with being quite possible. So Undertale and Deltarune are both trademarked by Royal Sciences LLC. And recognize that the game Undertale and Deltarune, but more importantly Undertale right now, has been distributed to millions of people across the entire world. What word do we use to talk about games being sold to people? Copies, right? Millions of copies have been sold of Undertale to various people. But during the stream, what if we saw the original version? Not a copy, just the straight up, the code, the original code that Toby / the Royal Sciences, the Royal Scientist Wing Gaster used in order to make Undertale. This is the original version. And in a meta context, this door is something that's like intrinsic, something that's like outside of kind of the universe of Undertale because it's Gaster related. And every other version of the door that we see is gray because it's copied across the copies of Undertale. Hopefully that makes sense. I know that I could have phrased that better, but what I'm saying is, because in the stream we get to see Toby's version of Undertale, and since Toby made the game, he has the original Gaster door, and that every other version of the door across the millions of literal copies of the game that there are is gray because copies are monochrome. Now, as far as why they didn't go in the door, I mentioned this in the last video, which is I think that it's just because there's nothing behind the door. Like, they didn't program anything behind the door to see, or else they would have had it as like a stream donation goal, but they didn't have that as a goal the same way that they had exploring the new home, new area, or the old home area, for example. This was not an option because it wasn't programmed in, and he had this door there, one, probably to suggest something about the topic of today's video, like copies being monochrome and gray and that kind of stuff, but also because he wants us to imagine for ourselves what lies beyond. So that's kind of the point of the last video, which I recommend that you watch after this one, because I think it's a pretty important message, probably a more important message than this one, honestly, or just for sure at this point. But my extra theory here is that what if Gaster being split across space and time was him being split across copies of Undertale? So what if, like, Gaster was a separate character from Undertale? Perhaps he made Undertale alongside Toby, or he's a meta character that exists over Undertale in a similar sense to Deltarune. But then he became a part of Undertale. He fell into Undertale, and when the game was distributed to millions of people, he became shattered across space and time alongside those copies of Undertale. If you consider the word copy in this context of being like copies of a game being distributed and sold, it becomes a lot more interesting, because that would be a solid reason to break someone, to fracture them across space and time, right? If I exist on this plane and I go into a game that then gets copied and sent to millions of people, there are now millions of versions of me out there, which is probably what happened to Gaster if you take it in that context. So my final thoughts here is that there are more than enough examples to conclude that copies, Gaster, and Gray are all tied together, and that Gaster seems to like making Gray copies for his experiments, like the vessels or the Gaster followers for his experiments, and also to serve him in some goal that he has, and that Gaster's original home of Undertale may have gotten copied, fracturing him across copies, or perhaps he fell into Undertale and got, fractured through that means as well. So that's my theory about the Gaster door. Hopefully that gives you some new ideas to explore, maybe some answers, maybe some more questions involving that strange door that appeared in the Undertale 10th anniversary streams that I've seen a lot of questions about. Hopefully that was helpful for you all. With that in mind, thanks for watching the video. If you made it this far in the video, then you must like the video, so why not like the video? And also a big shout out to all the supporters on Patreon, Ko-Fi, and YouTube. Also, big shout out to Hufflepuff Prefect and Tybee being the highest tier of supporters. With that in mind, I love you guys. Be safe, be smart, don't be stupid, and have a great rest of your day.